unleashing. We appreciate all of our witnesses for taking the time to testify before us today. And Ms. Bhagwati, you are now recognized for 5 minutes for your oral testimony.
Thank you. Dear Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for holding this hearing on a critical issue facing our veterans community and for the opportunity to present the views of the Service Women's Action Network, or SWAN, on the challenges confronting veterans who file PTSD claims related to military sexual assault or sexual harassment. According to VA, PTSD is the most common mental health condition associated with military sexual trauma, or MST. For women veterans, MST is a greater predictor of PTSD than combat. Studies also indicate that sexual harassment causes the same rates of PTSD in women as combat does in men. And 40 to 53% of homeless women veterans have been sexually assaulted while in the military. Simply put, MST has devastated the veterans community. I would also like to point out that many men suffer from the effects of military sexual violence. According to the Department of Defense, 12% of all unrestricted sexual assault reports are made by men. Additionally, according to VA, almost 46% of the veterans who screened positive for MST in 2010 were men. Veterans who suffer from the debilitating effects of MST face unique challenges in obtaining disability compensation from the VA. In 2011, SWAN and the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the VA for data on MST claims. The data obtained through litigation showed that between fiscal year 2008 and 2010, only 32.3% of MST-based PTSD claims were approved by VA, compared to an approval rate of 54.2% for all other PTSD claims during this time. Also, veterans who had their MST PTSD claims approved by VA, or among those veterans who had those claims approved, women were more likely to receive a 10 to 30% disability rating, whereas men were more likely to receive a 70 to 100% disability rating. To reiterate, veterans who file a PTSD claim based on MST only have a 1 in 3 chance of getting their claim approved. Also, data suggests a strong gender bias in PTSD disability ratings in favor of men. The MST claims process is broken at best. VA's PTSD policy discriminates in practice against veterans who are sexually assaulted or harassed while in uniform by holding them to an evidentiary standard which is not only higher than that of other groups of veterans suffering from PTSD, but also completely unrealistic for the majority of survivors to meet. The language in the regulation that establishes the required evidence for what VA calls an in-service personal assault differs radically from the language used to describe the evidence required for all other PTSD claims. In fact, CFR 3.304, paragraph F, the regulation, allows for lay testimony as acceptable evidence in all other PTSD cases except in cases of an in-service personal assault. VA policy fails veterans for a variety of reasons. First, sexual assault and sexual harassment in the military are notoriously underreported. According to DoD, almost 87% of assaults go unreported, meaning that official documentation of an assault rarely exists. Secondly, prior to the new evidence retention laws passed in the 2011 NDAA, the services routinely destroyed all evidence and investigation records in sexual assault cases after 2 to 5 years, leaving gaping holes in MST claims filed prior to 2012. Lastly, the allowance of so-called secondary evidence described in the regulation does not take into consideration the reality that many victims do not report the incidents to anyone, including family members, and for a variety of legitimate reasons, including shame, stigma, embarrassment, or fear of retaliation. Although sexual assault increases the chance of adverse emotional responses and behaviors, it does not mean that all MST claimants will experience those symptoms. In fact, SWAN has spoken to survivors who demonstrate changes in behavior not included in the regulation, such as improved job performance as a means of coping with the trauma. After a series of conversations SWAN had with the Undersecretary of Benefits last year about VA's discriminatory practices, the Undersecretary issued a memo in June 2011 providing further guidance to claims officers and instituting training requirements for processing MST claims. However, both the letter and the training simply reinforce the existing regulation, which places a double standard on MST claimants. To fix MST claims policy, VBA must immediately revise the regulation to provide language that establishes the same evidentiary requirements for MST-based PTSD claims that it does for other claims. Furthermore, there should be no requirement that veterans filing MST claims go through an independent compensation and pension or CNP exam to verify that they have PTSD or any other conditions associated with MST. Veterans should not be forced to dig up their trauma for complete strangers who often lack the sensitivity or professional qualifications to speak to survivors of sexual trauma, and who often unfairly reverse the PTSD diagnosis made by qualified VHA or other mental health providers. Additionally, claims reviewers should not have the authority to second-guess evaluations by agency medical professionals or to discount VA treatment records in favor of these one-time CNP exam results. Thank you very much for your attention. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I think this committee recognizes that many veterans are having difficulty receiving benefits related to MST. And despite the relaxed evidentiary standard, many veterans still have a difficulty providing the evidence required for the award of a service connection disability. In each of your opinions, can you kind of touch, in your personal opinion, your experience on why that is happening?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is I wouldn't refer to them as relaxed evidentiary standards. I would refer to them as actually harder evidentiary standards. There's a two-tier system right now, one for PTSD generally and then one for MST PTSD. And those veterans, again, 87% of these assaults are never reported for very good reason because of fear of retaliation within the military and a variety of other factors related to rape and assault and the trauma that results. And so we have to think more strategically about what counts as a fair evidentiary standard, but the regulation itself gives you that suggestion, and it's clear in all other cases of PTSD that the veteran's testimony, the lay testimony, is sufficient as long as that veteran has the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder from a qualified medical provider, as well as proof of time in service. And there's language in that regulation for every other veteran suffering from PTSD, with the exception of rape, assault, and harassment, and it's completely unfair.